mixed in. But I am not a toxicologist, nor am I a chemist by training. So a lot of the more chemistry heavy slides and toxicology heavy slides have been lent to me, but I will try to answer any questions related to that that you might pose. So I'm going to briefly talk about more of a policy-related issue that we have occurring in the state of Maine. And the title of the talk is PFAS in Maine, Implications for Vector Control. So we're going to go over, basic overview, a little bit of background data on what PFAS is, some of the impacts that have been reported, the current situation as it stands in Maine, and then current legislation, and then kind of future concerns. This would be kind of a wrap-up slide towards the very end. So to get into basics, PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They are a very broad category of synthetic chemicals frequently used in both household and manufacturing related concerns, primarily dealing with protection of containers that could be used for holding food, consumables, also chemicals. Primarily repellency for PFAS is made to repel against oil, water, or heat that may degrade containers that will be holding compounds or products. As I said, it's frequently used in consumer and industrial grade products, including nonstick pans, stain-resistant carpeting products, food packaging. So many of the snack foods that you may like, the oils on these snack foods may actually impact the plastic packaging of the bags. So frequently, a lot of snack bags are actually sprayed with PFAS compounds on the inside to prevent degradation of the material. Frequently, clothing, especially clothing that is considered flame retardant, is also treated with PFAS, and then firefighting foams. These chemicals are very long-lasting and have a long persistence time in the environment, making them a concern for both animals and humans as well. This slide shows a basic quote-unquote PFAS cycle that may occur. So frequently, you can see that you have industrial concerns creating products. Off waste of possible PFAS may go into water bodies. The products themselves may ending up in our systems, our bodies, animal bodies. There has been a strong component of PFAS that has been found to be processed from the creation of sludge from landfills or wastewater, which would be animal and human waste. And so in that way, it ends up in landfills, but also you can see going through the agricultural sector. You may have PFAS that is then being used and repurposed. I'm going to talk specifically about a case in Maine where we have repurposed landfill sludge, which has put PFAS into the environment. So you can see that there is a very complex system and cycle where PFAS may make its way into the environment and sustain itself, then finding its way back into us and causing health issues. There has been a strong amount of data looking at its relationship to domestic animals. And in many cases, there has been a lot of data looking at health concerns from PFAS in laboratory studies. In many cases, animals are used, as in a lot of other biomedical sciences, as a proxy for human health exposure. But animals and animal tissue or animal products, such as milk, may also be a source for exposure of PFAS to human beings. PFAS has also been studied extensively across the globe in wildlife. And similarly to how in disease studies, such as work conducted looking at serologic testing of wildlife for vector-borne pathogens, you can also use wildlife for testing for, and so really the first reports of PFAS occurring were published in 2001. However, over 300 species have been sampled for examination of PFAS, including invertebrates, amphibians, fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals. In humans, the most common ways of exposure to PFAS could be occupational, which would include things such as production workers, firefighters, and then ski wax technicians. And, if you need to learn something new every day in creating this talk, I learned that ski wax technicians are an actual job for people. I didn't know that before. There's and so environmental exposure, such as proximity to manufacturing facilities, wastewater treatment facilities of PFAS into people. And then, of course, there's also general exposure, which would include things like diet and consumer goods. And to just describe both again, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of snack bags that may hold popcorn or potato chips or pretzels, which, of course, PFAS may then come off of the inside of the bag lining, get onto the food, you consume those snacks, and then acquire the PFAS that way. However, consumer goods, there has been some detection of PFAS in household containers, such as plastic bottles that are used to hold laundry or dish detergent. The PFAS is a liner inside those containers because possible detergents may degrade some of the plastic and weaken them. So the PFAS is used as a sealant. However, PFAS can leach off of the inside of these containers. There can be a dermal uptake of PFAS into human tissue. By using dish detergent, where you may have PFAS if you're washing dishes with your hands, you may actually become exposed to PFAS in that manner. Wildlife or animals also have very similar exposure routes as well. So again, proximity to contaminated sites, such as agriculture, or the increase of PFAS bioaccumulation by predators eating species that may have acquired PFAS. In this case, we have a picture of a seal which may be eating fish that has a heavy dose of PFAS inside of it. And this is very similar to what happens with heavy metals as well. So in general, the advisory from the EPA, we're really looking at a lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion of PFAS. That is considered to be above which is considered to be possible for health issues. And so just to jump down to the state of Maine, our wonderful pine tree state, we had an issue a couple of years ago showing up just about the time of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic was arising, where PFAS was heavily detected at some agricultural sites. And if we go back to the slide, looking at 70 parts per as a possible health issue, we had one in Maine where PFAS was detected 20,000 parts per trillion. Many of this was on an active agricultural field in Somerset County, Maine, which is in central Maine, north of Augusta. And there was active agriculture with dairy cattle. And they were finding that PFAS was detected in milk and also in contaminated soils. And it was believed that, although a possibility, parts of central Maine, proximal, in many cases, these agricultural fields in Somerset County were actually treated with sludge that had PFAS that was contaminated. And I'm going to put this in a little bit into perspective because in Maine, we had approximately almost 2 decades ago an industry that was starting that was looking at being able to recycle human sludge as a component for adding to farm and agricultural fields. And at the time, this was actually viewed very benignly as a very an innovative form of green tech sludge, and then turning it into an actual compostable material that you could add to farm fields for both human and or animals. And at the time, this was actually viewed very positively. And I think that in hindsight, this does go back to the idea that, taking the long view, some of these technologies that may be initially viewed as very positive may actually have some implications as you go further down the road. I think a parallel to this might be those of you that are an X-generation person like myself may remember when Polartec fabric came out in the 1990s. It was viewed as highly beneficial. Here we had a new fabric that was being used in a lot of outdoor goods, such as fleece, that was providing innovative clothing for outdoor recreational wear, and was viewed as positive because you were taking plastics that would otherwise be thrown in landfills and recycled into fabric that could be worn. However, we now find that fleece contributes a lot of microplastics into the environment. And so I think it's one of these things that, again, over time, you begin to see that something that may be viewed initially as being very positive and as a green innovation may turn out to have some pretty serious side effects as you go down the road. And so investigations that were conducted found that PFAS was detected in massively high quantities. And I heard one of our state veterinarians actually describe this as one of the highest concentrations of PFAS found during a study on the planet since PFAS has been detected, this detection in Somerset County, Maine. As a consequence, ancillary warnings cropped up saying that in addition to a prohibition on milk and meat consumption from agricultural products, there was also a prohibition on harvested deer from that area, because deer, of course, those of you that know about the biology of white-tailed deer and their feeding habits, they will frequently, or new growth coming up on ag fields. And so there was a strong uptake of PFAS into the venison that were found when deer were examined following the hunting season that year. So there actually was ancillary prohibitions on products such as venison from those areas. As a consequence of this PFAS issue, the state of Maine decided to do surveys of both ground and septic, or groundwater and septic sludge surveys to detect PFAS. And these results are not out yet, but this is simply a map showing where across the state these surveys are currently being conducted and data were being analyzed. The hope is that they will actually have some forthcoming data in the next couple of years. So as a consequence, the state of Maine decided to really start working on legislative items that would curtail or at least slow the increase appearance of PFAS in the environment. And these are covering several active chemicals that were found in products. Specifically, the law, I'll go over the next couple of slides, are going to actually detail the laws. So Public Law 2023-138, an act to support manufacturers whose products contain perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And essentially what this does is beginning January 1st, 2025, there is a prohibition on sale, distribution for sale in the state of Maine of any product intentionally containing PFAS. That means that products that have PFAS as a component of their chemistry are going to be prohibited for sale or distribution for sale within the state of Maine. Well, so this is where it rubs back to the title of the talk, the implications for vector control, because among this are two key active ingredients that we find when we talk about vector-borne disease and vector-borne disease control or prevention. One of these is the very common acaricidal chemical called bifenthrin, which is frequently used for broadcast synthetic pesticide applications to control ticks, such as the black-legged tick, Ixodes scapularis. Bifenthrin is also very effective, though, at controlling Dermacentor variabilis, as well as Amblyomma americanum, the Lone Star tick. In addition, the compound fipronil is also found to contain PFAS as part of its chemical composition. Fipronil, for those of you that have dogs or cats, will recognize fipronil being found in the common veterinary product known as Frontline, which is a common top spot chemical given to dogs and cats for flea and tick control. In addition, fipronil is also the key ingredient in one of the rodent-targeted tick management tools, the Select Tick Control System bait box, which controls subadult Ixodes scapularis on mice and chipmunks. So there's certainly an ongoing discussion right now, talking with state regulators about how application of these products and their importance for vector control and or public and veterinary health, how that's going to play out in the face of this legislation that's going to be coming up. But I wanted to bring this up just as an idea of two key products that we see frequently in the vector world could be impacted by this legislation. Another legislative act enacted in 2021, an act to stop perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances as pollution. So this is going to require manufacturers of products with intentionally added PFAS to reports the intentionally added presence of PFAS in those products to the department now beginning January 1st, 2025. It also prohibits the sale of certain hard materials such as carpets or rugs, but also possibly fire retardant materials as well that may contain PFAS. But again, this is going to be something that is going to be really targeting the manufacturers of some of these compounds. And so I think that this is something that is going to have some ongoing discussion. Changes in chemical composition, possibly how we create or think about new products to bring to market that may not have these PFAS compounds in. And then also, how critical are these PFAS compounds to the actual effectiveness of the compounds that are being applied to kill ticks and or mosquitoes. And finally, a legislative response 2019, an act to require the registration of adjuvants in the state and to regulate the distribution of pesticides with perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. All this really means is that adjuvants, which are frequently added to pesticides that may help with solubility or longevity in the environment, are now in Maine going to be classified as pesticides, and they will fall under the same restrictions if they have PFAS within them. So again, more items for discussion with regulatory agencies, especially in the realm of vector control. And so, really, this is not an easy topic. This is a very complex topic, and it's one that has a lot of stakeholders. I mean, we're talking about potentially human health, veterinary health, animal health, environmental health, also things obviously such as toxicology issues as well that are going to be roped in. And of course, there has been some questions when you're looking at these various compounds, such as bifenthrin or fipronil. Is the PFAS, initially there was some questions about whether the PFAS itself was actually part of the compound, part of the chemistry of these agents, or was the PFAS being found in bifenthrin, for example, a result of coming off of containers. And that was actually a lot of initial work to be teased out, because that would certainly make some differences on how you could craft the legislation and what would be the prohibitions going forward. If it was a factor that the PFAS was actually getting into the bifenthrin or fipronil from the packaging, well, that would actually be a little bit of a simpler option, in that you simply change the packaging. To some extent, many companies have been getting away from using plastic for the housing of chemicals, frequently going towards stainless steel or possibly glass, as opposed to plastics, which might require PFAS treatment. But then, of course, if the question comes up that you actually have PFAS as part of the chemical composition of the product itself, well, that's going to cause a reworking of the product. And if the product itself, it finds that the PFAS chemicals are integral to that product, well, it's for sale or use. And this, of course, would cover sprays that would be sprayed by a licensed pest control applicator, but also over-the-counter products that you would be buying at several outdoor stores, and that could be applied by homeowners on their properties. And I'm going to scroll through a couple of these to really kind of get down to how prevalent actually is the idea of these containers that are holding PFAS. How prevalent is it that every bottle of laundry detergent that you have in your home has PFAS on the inside? Well, it's pretty common. Most of the household chemical containers that you have in your home are going to be treated with these PFAS compounds, and so it's very widespread. And the impact of having these on the environment is going to be strong enough that's going to, creating, at least within the state of Maine, a lot of concern. And there has been some discussion about certain companies may not be willing to approach or release their products within the state for use. And I think that one of the things that we really don't, there's a perception among some communities that PFAS, it's been around for a while. a lot of these chemical compounds have been in use for well over 40 years. And, these things are in the environment with high persistence. And so in many ways, this does seem like very small steps to reduce the burden of PFAS in the environment. But I think that in many cases, the state regulators feel that they are compelled, that they have to do something. And I think these are, in many ways, are baby steps that are being used to address this problem. But, the reality is that, like the old saying goes, if you look hard enough, you'll find it. And based on a lot of early initial studies, everywhere where you have had enough sample size to look at samples of either water, sludge, soil, or wildlife samples, they're finding PFAS present on the landscape. So it is, for lack of a better term, everywhere that you look. And so it is obviously something that is not a new situation in the state. This is obviously also creating issues in the ag industry. Certainly a prohibition or a ban on consuming products, especially in areas where we have local, creating a lot of consternation. We have a very strong, in Maine, a very strong organic presence, with many farms being listed as organic as part of their identity. And certainly farms that are using soil enrichment, such as compost, now have to be aware that, it's possible that the quote unquote organic compost that they're getting to enrich their farm fields may actually contain PFAS. And so it's a matter of also increased testing is finding more of this, the more that some of these industries actually examine this problem. And so just to and go to one of the areas with some of the new legislation and some of the other products that possibly could be affected outside of the vector industry are also medicines. They're finding that certain chemicals that are used for a variety of medical conditions, such as antidepressants, treatments for cystic fibrosis, as well as tumor remediation, also may be acted and maybe under some of this new legislation. All pesticides not classified as PFAS have to be tested for registration. And so all will be banned in 2030 unless currently they can go through an exemption process by the Maine DEP, which is our state agency for environmental regulation. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion going forward as well about issues such as public health emerge, and certainly bifenthrin, which is the one I'm going to come back to. Bifenthrin is used very broadly as both a vector control product for both ticks, but also to a lesser extent mosquitoes. And in the event of an outbreak or an epizootic of something like Eastern equine encephalitis virus, where you may require a compound like sprayed, is it possible we would have public exemptions to be made going forward before the legislation comes into full bore? And again, just to highlight the very long list of active ingredients classified as PFAS in Maine. We have obviously a couple, fipronil and bifenthrin I've talked about that are related to the vector control industry, but we certainly have others as well that may have some impact on IPM going forward. And so for pesticides that are registered in Maine, manufacturers are now required to have affidavits before there is the release of products or new products coming into Maine, stating whether or not they actually have PFAS in them prior to these legislative bans that will be beginning in 2025. And so I think industries are getting ready for this. We currently have over 11,000 registered pesticides in the state of Maine. The PFAS classification and legislation is currently expected to affect somewhere around 12 to 14% of the currently existing products in the state. And of course, these bans would be starting initially in 2025, but then with an idea of these products fully off the market and out of use by 2030. And so, again, getting back to the future concerns that some people might have, again, we have seen certainly in some cases in Maine, especially, we do have very much a community-based idea towards integrated pest management. We do have certain communities in Maine at the town or municipality level where there are pesticide bans that have gone on. However, precedent is that in the face of a public health emergency, these pesticides, something like mosquitoes that are broadly in the landscape. So we may actually have exemptions for public health where bans on certain chemicals may be lifted. But this also does raise the question of why we probably need new products developed. Certainly other issues such as pesticide resistance development in both mosquitoes, but also to a lesser extent ticks, are something that is a concern that we are seeing. Currently in Maine, we have been working with Cornell University for the last 3 years, looking at pesticide resistance in select mosquito species across several counties in Maine. And we are finding that there is some low-level resistance developing in Culex pipiens, the enzootic vector of West Nile virus. And so I think that, this does mean that resistance is a real issue we come down the road, but it is something that is present on the Maine landscape and it needs to be considered. To this end as well, right now, currently, synthetic pyrethroids, of which bifenthrin is one, is really our major class of acaricidal and to a lesser extent mosquito control products for control. Development of resistance to not only an individual compound like bifenthrin, but also synthetic acaricides or synthetic pyrethroids broadly is going to mean that we need to have some other compounds in the pipeline. And currently, there really isn't a whole lot out there on the landscape that's going to be coming down. As an example, I will bring up this slide, which was from a paper in the Journal of Medical Entomology in 2021 by Tom Mather's group at University of Rhode Island, where they were looking at alternatives to synthetic pesticides. And of course, they did test bifenthrin as a positive control during the study. And of course, when they were looking at spray treatments on black-legged ticks, bifenthrin, of course, was probably the most successful product they used. As an alternative, they were looking and examining a lot of the 25B products that are currently on the market in 2021. And they found that the actual level of control on Ixodes scapularis was quite low compared to bifenthrin. And so when we talk about the possibilities for alternative chemicals to be created and implemented on the landscape, we really need to think in terms of how effective these chemicals are actually going to be. I think that the 25B products, it's a really good idea. And I really think that there's a lot of work to be done in this field to make and get better products to market. But the current state of products that are out there, really leaves the field wanting. In many cases, I think you can look and say that the area of the 25B products, the field was actually better off 15 years ago when we had certain products on the market that were actually fairly effective at controlling Ixodes scapularis and had close to above a 70% control on this tick, whereas now, really, I think Eucatone, which have been proven to be fairly effective at control. And so that's pretty much what I have as a very broad discussion. Really acknowledgements. A lot of these slides were given to me by the folks at the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. The Bureau of Pest were very helpful in providing information, along with staff at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and in particular, Tegwin Taylor, one of our wildlife veterinarians, who is conducting a lot of the PFAS surveillance in coordination with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, was also able to donate slides. And I can now answer any questions you have. Because I'm working off of an iPhone on this, I'm going to let Ryan field the questions for me, and I can answer them if that will work. And I will do a stop share.
Thank you, Chuck, for that presentation. Yeah, if you have any questions, please put it either in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Right now, we don't have any questions, but please feel free. While that goes on, I'm going to put the poll question on.
I really appreciate this presentation. This actually came up. I was giving a tick presentation to our Department of Environmental Conservation here in New York. And when I was talking about permethrin treated clothes, I was asked specifically about this, and it was the first I had heard. So I was relieved to see that permethrin was not on the list. Does that mean that it has been dubbed clear of PFAS?
You know, I don't think so yet. And of course, the one thing that I actually, and I don't know this, but I think it's actually something very much worth looking into, is the idea of, is a PFAS compound used in the impregnation process? So there are certainly companies that you can send, you buy a pair of Carhartts, you mail them off, get them impregnated by a company with permethrin. Is there a PFAS compound involved in that process? Possibly. You know, I wouldn't know, but that is actually something worth looking into and checking to see, and how that will impact. You know, very similarly, Maine, I will say to some extent, Maine was actually very slow, for instance, in pursuing the idea of internet sales tax and enforcement of that. And so I think that, again, the idea of a mail order product that you could get, which would then have quote unquote PFAS in it and then mailed back to you, I think that's probably a loophole right now that hasn't really been fully explored.
Mm. And I think that was the concern, that because it has that residual long-lasting implication that there's PFAS involved with it. I did do some Googling and I wasn't able to find anything there, but that doesn't mean that it's not.
Well, and I will say that, again, the only question with permethrin, again, to my mind, most immediate would be the actual container and any residual coming off of the inside of the bottle. You know, I think of, and in fact, I can't think of a compound, a permethrin product that is not either aerosol or a plastic. I mean, I haven't bought PFAS ever in a glass bottle, you know, for instance. So I think that some of these plastic containers may very well have PFAS on the inside of the containers. So they could, again, potentially have some that's coming off of the inside of the containment into the compound itself.
There's always something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Thank you, Chuck. We do have two questions in the chat. So the first one is, do you see vector source reduction and public education as important components to achieve stopping sale of products with intentionally added PFAS by 2025?
Yeah, I think there's going to be I can say that from my understanding of talking to state regulators is that we are going to have a lot of open public comment period as well that are going to be talking about these issues. And I think within that, you know, there has to be some discussion about how important some of these products actually might be, and the lack of a suitable alternative. You know, if nothing comes up on the landscape, and the primary component to still protect your dogs and cats from fleas and ticks is something like Frontline that has fipronil, and there is not a current replacement for that product, you know, how are you going to balance that question? You know, I think, though, that certainly the other thing that this does spur is the idea of other integrated pest management approaches. You know, we certainly know for ticks, for instance, habitat management works really well for some species of ticks. I. scapularis is the prime example where a lot of vegetative management will actually work to knock them back, or I would say environmental management such as removal of leaf litter around homes is probably a fairly effective method for reducing tick populations. So I think that's something that probably is going to be advocated more strongly as an alternative.
Thank you. And then we have one more question. How do they test for PFAS in the lab? Will there be a portable test?
That is an excellent question. Currently, the testing is done at our state agencies. To my knowledge, there is not a current in-house PFAS test that you can buy and bring home with you. But I think right now too, the other thing that it was interesting. There may be some market forces at work on how desirable it might be to create an at-home PFAS test. But when I was talking about this topic at the Northeast Mosquito Control Association meeting last week, while there is some discussion in other New England states and Northeast states about PFAS, Maine currently it seems to be the only one who is really approaching legislation at the state level. So this may not be as much of a front burner issue in other states as it seems to be in Maine. We also, unfortunately, have the rather alarming case report in central Maine, where we had such dramatically high PFAS levels that really brought this to the forefront. So I think that there may be some market forces at work as to whether or not a PFAS in-home test would actually be viable. But there are commercial labs that you can send stuff to right now where you can get PFAS testing. Currently, all the work that's being done in Maine, though, is being tested at state or cooperating laboratories.
We have another question. Are there initiatives to halt manufacture of PFAS? I believe just one company has a monopoly on it. Are there multiple companies that manufacture PFAS too?
Well, so there are, there's multiple chemicals that are considered to be PFAS chemicals. It's a broad category of chemical, and certainly the manufacture of PFAS. I would suspect that there are currently alternatives. One of the state toxicologists that I was talking to in regards to this presentation was saying that there has been a strong push among manufacturers of insecticides, so say producers of something like deltamethrin or permethrin. There has been a strong push to get away from PFAS treated containers, so that you're not having inadvertent leaching of PFAS from containers into your compounds. And so that's been, I think, one of the big industrial pushes right now, is to get away from PFAS treated containers so that you don't have contamination of your product.
Hey, Charles, great talk.
Thanks.
I just had two clarifying questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned adjuvants being classified as a pesticide now. So
Yes.
when you're looking at a label from here on out in Maine, would PFAS be listed as an active ingredient?
It should be in the adjuvant. There should be there probably is a type of PFAS. If PFAS is present as an active chemical, it should be one of the, usually I think they are active ingredients in the actual adjuvant itself. So you should see in the listing for the product. And I will say the other thing, just as an addendum to that, one of the other issues that came up with that legislation dealing with adjuvants, there was a concern because apparently, in addition to adjuvants, things like colorants, which can be added to pesticides as well, have decided to not be classified as a pesticide, and so colorants are still exempt from that. Not that that's a major issue for a lot of folks, but it is something that did come up with the legislation. So
awesome. And then my second clarifying question was something you just mentioned, was with your collaboration with Cornell, there was some detected resistance in Culex pipiens to bifenthrin.
Not bifenthrin, but to other pesticides. Etofenaprox is one that we are seeing some resistance in Culex pipiens. We are seeing some resistance from BTI as well in some populations, and these are very much based at the county level. But bifenthrin is one that we have not seen resistance develop yet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Please put in the chat. Also, we have the poll out, so please do participate in that poll if you haven't already for the post quiz. Well, I think that's all the questions that people have for you, Chuck. Thank you for
Okay.
that presentation. That was great. We
All
do
right.
have a recording and we'll send that out probably next week for everybody. So that will come out later, and then our next session will be January 10th, and I will keep everybody updated as we reach that date. But other than that, everyone have a happy holidays and happy New Year.
Thank you very much. See you, folks. Thanks.
Thank you.